All right. So tonight's speaker is Tracy Griffith Swain. She's a fraud investigations supervisor for South State Bank, certified fraud examiner, and advanced certified paralegal. She's going to be presenting top wire fraud schemes, business email compromise, and romance scams, discussing how people get caught up in these scams and how financial institutions, as well as colleagues and loved ones, can be aware of the red flags that someone is vulnerable or has fallen victim to a scam. Presentation also focuses on BEC, or business email compromise, as the top trends in wire fraud that also have a cyber tech component. So Tracy, thank you for being with us tonight. Tracy, we are good to go. It's all you.
Wonderful. As Corey said, my name is Tracy Swaim. I am a certified fraud examiner. He also mentioned that I'm a paralegal. I do have a legal background, which means that I have a vested interest in making sure that my investigations are carried out following the letter of the law and looking for the best possible ways to go catch these bad guys, making sure to gather that evidence correctly so that we can hand that over to law enforcement to further our investigation, and with hopefully the end result of putting criminals in jail. We are going to talk today about cyber fraud, which I'm sure you're familiar with to some degree. Specifically, though, we're going to talk international wire fraud trends. And I've got my top two that I'm going to address today. The way that we're going to talk about this is I'm going to give kind of an overview of what I mean when I say wire fraud for purposes of this discussion tonight. And then we're going to talk about two different types. We're going to talk about BEC, business email compromise, and romance scams. In each of those, I'm going to talk about the key players, what it truly means in the eyes of the law, and what is actually going on during these scams. We're going to talk about the economic impact and why we care about this. And we're going to look for ways to work together to detect this when it goes on. At the very end, I'm going to wrap up with, so what, why do we care? And I'll tell you why. Let's go ahead and get started. Wire fraud is more than just numbers moving around. This is people's livelihoods, businesses, our communities. What I want you to take away from this is how information security tech can help detect and investigate wire fraud. So we're going to talk about two different stories tonight. We've got image number one is Palmetto Family Movers. They have a secretary named Mary Cooper who runs booking the jobs and paying invoices for supplies and truck maintenance. One day, Mary receives an urgent email from her boss telling her, I can't answer my phone right now, but you need to wire $55,000 to Goodman Car Dealer at this account number, and hurry. Full stop, no further response. So of course, pressed for time, Mary, panicking, calls the bank and sets up the wire transfer. She knows this vendor. They've dealt with each other many times in the past. They've bought cars. They've had cars fixed. But this time, something different is going on that Mary doesn't realize. The funds are now going to Ghana instead of the car dealer. Story number two, Elizabeth is a single mom of two who meets a soldier on Match.com. After talking, texting, and emailing through their very intense relationship over the past 6 months, he's been deployed this whole time, of course. James Rowland starts to ask for money because he is stuck in Afghanistan. What we're going to talk about today affects us all, especially in the cybersecurity and information security space, because we have a hand helping prevent it. This slide is where I show you I am not making this all up as I go. Here are the agencies that we work with today and the groups I'm a part of who dedicate time and resources to prevent and investigate wire fraud. We have government agencies like the FTC and FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. FinCEN maintains this massive database of all of the suspicious activity reports that banks and casinos and any other industry that might have fraud or money laundering, they house all of those reports so that law enforcement can go in, extract that data, and go catch the bad guys. We work with law enforcement like the FBI, who also has IC3, the Internet Crime Complaint Center. The US Secret Service, we work with them frequently, and even local organizations like SLED. We do training right alongside them, and we help get people arrested. We are also members of investigations trade groups, the ACFE, which is the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. That's what I'm certified through. The IAFCI, which is a mouthful of alphabet soup letters, but they are the Association of International Financial Crimes Investigators. So they are law enforcement from all over the world. And we are also huge nerds. So we attend annual conferences and sit around in a big group of 3,000 other nerds from all over the world and talk about fraud all day. There are also podcasts that we listen to on white collar crime. I've got the logo for one right there, Fraud Talk, but I also just discovered one called The Fraudcast, which I cannot wait to listen to. This is how I get the information and the training to share with groups like this. All right, first item on the list is BEC, or business email compromise. I will use those terms interchangeably. Let's define it. Keep in mind our story from earlier, story number 1, the Palmetto Moving Company. The FBI's definition of business email compromise is here on the screen. This is the definition most institutions use and pretty much encompasses what we deal with. I will say, however, the transactions do not have to move internationally for it to be considered suspicious, nor is it only via wire transfer. ACH or even person-to-person transfers can be involved in a BEC. Most often, BEC rings start out overseas. Hotbeds include Eastern Europe and former bloc states, as well as Nigeria and Ghana, which is par for the course for a lot of these cyber frauds. The perpetrators will obtain some information about a company or a person through social engineering or using OSINT. The very tools that we use to investigate them, they're using to socially engineer their victims, and vice versa, whatever comes first. In our story from earlier, the perpetrators gathered the data they found through Secretary of State documents and the company's own website to get the name of the CEO, then sent him an email pretending to be a marine and boating shop because they could tell from his Facebook page how much he loved his boat. In that email was a phishing link, and what do people do when they see links? They click them. So of course he clicked, and they've been monitoring his email for weeks. Who are our victims? Well, unfortunately, many businesses are vulnerable to this. It affects businesses of all types: dentist offices, family moving companies like Palmetto, law firms, especially anything involving a real estate transaction. Those are particularly choice for the BEC scammers. Financial and investment advisors are victimized by this frequently as well, because those large sums of money that are moving around very quickly are interesting to them, and they want to go ahead and grab some of that. What is the economic impact? Also known as, why do we care? It is estimated that BEC is a $5 billion industry. That is billion with a B, with losses of $1.7 billion in 2019 alone. Losses are often a large one-time payment. I've seen like a bill pay setup though too, where they keep that payment coming in under the radar, hoping that the company won't notice that the funds have been sent to a completely different person this whole time. I've seen all amounts, from $2,500 hijacked payroll to $250,000 real estate transactions with that money gone. If the funds are sent internationally, they are often not recoverable. Your bank's fraud department may have a few tricks up their sleeve. We have worked with the Secret Service to try and recover funds, but usually by the time they have realized what's happened, the money's 3 or 4 steps removed. The FBI does try to work with international agents to recover funds, but they do have more luck domestically. The IC3, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, can act on reports that are made, and in 2019, they were able to recover about $304 million for victims of BEC who sent funds domestically. Cool point about the Internet Crime Complaint Center, that is actually part of the FBI. I don't know if y'all know this. I always encourage people to file reports with IC3 because, unlike a lot of other government agencies, these reports do not fall into a black hole. An actual live human being is on the other end reading all of these reports, compiling the data, looking for patterns, trying to piece rings of activity together. So I always encourage IC3 as a valuable resource when it comes to internet crimes.
Tracy, along those lines, we recommend people, put those in as well. Is there anywhere else where people should report those sorts of things? Because you do see like FTC and you see the FCC and you see all sorts of places taking these kinds of crime reports.
They get a lot of their data from the FBI. So the FTC actually, honestly, cool points for the FTC lately. They have really stepped up their game as far as scams and fraud reporting. With the COVID-19 stuff that was starting to really ramp up a few months ago, they put out a lot of really good publications on COVID-19 scams and things to be aware of. And they were taking in all of those reports, and they have been compiling that data. But they aren't a law enforcement agency in the same way that the FBI is. They can sue people for sure, and they can work to shut things down, but they mostly work as part of a shared effort between Department of Justice. So IC3, that was a really roundabout way of saying report to IC3 definitely, and the FTC probably.
I'm curious about how these businesses are targeted. I don't know how common a wire transfer is for a typical small business, but it seems like something you would, like you said, real estate and things like that specifically. But is it a specific type of business, or once you get to a certain level, you did a wire transfer? How would you kind of maybe be aware of this?
So wires are particularly interesting to scammers because that money is immediately available on the other side. With an ACH or like a bill pay transfer, you always have, I think, 24 hours to 48 hours in some cases to claw that money back. Wire transfers, the funds drop immediately. So they like wire transfers. And I've even seen where we have an email compromise for a hijacked vendor relationship where the scammer will say, hey, I know you usually pay me by ACH, but this payment is late and you need to pay me by wire transfer today. So they will often force that wire because of the immediate funds availability.
And then provide information that doesn't lead back to the.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Okay. So it's what I was getting at is, like, for me personally, it would cost me money to do a wire, and I would raise red flags for that. But a business that may do it on a fairly regular basis may not raise as many red flags because someone's requesting a wire.
Right.
And you've got that sense of urgency that this payment is late, you need to pay me today.
Okay.
That they're socially engineering them to convince them to make this transaction sooner. And they don't want them to think about it. Because to your point, you're exactly right. The more you think about it, the more weird it sounds. And I have to pay $50 to send this wire. Why on earth would I do it? Because you've been convinced and manipulated to do so.
Right.
Yeah. And then so this is very akin to the SMS scams that happen where they're like, go out and I need you to go out right now and buy $7,000 worth of Apple gift cards and send me the numbers off of them now.
Yes.
From your CEO or whatever. And
yes, it's the exact same MO.
Yeah. Someone in chat, Jedi Timmy asked, is there fraud happening around the subject of COVID-19?
Absolutely. So much of it. Right now, and I'll talk about one of these in a little bit. Right now, a lot of what we're seeing is bad medicine. We're seeing phishing links, click here for a cure, click here to get on the registry, send us $39.95 and we will send you a home test kit. Whatever obscure thing you can think of, people are finding a way to pitch some COVID-19 cure or resource in this scam. But I'm happy to talk about that as well. I want to make sure that we have a chance to address the economic impact for our community and the US and even the global economy of what we see that occurs here. Not only is it the $1.7 billion in straight up money gone, if our small businesses suffer, we suffer. If we have a business that loses everything or almost everything due to this, that brings us down as a community, as a neighborhood. There are unseen costs here too, with investigating and prosecuting these criminals, because they have to commit even more crimes in order to bring this money back into the legitimate economy. So not only are you obtaining these funds under false pretenses, you have to further launder that. You have to grow your network in order to bring in money mules, which are like drug mules, but they move cash. There are more crimes now to prosecute as this grows. So there are costs there to investigate and convict these criminals. So one BEC can have a much larger impact on our criminal justice system than just the one email or the one wire transaction. In 2018, there was a coordinated international takedown of BEC scammers called Operation WireWire. I don't know how they named this. It is truly brilliant. Operation WireWire is very clever. I'm being facetious, of course. 74 arrests, though, with this with this takedown. They had people from all over the U.S. who were arrested. They worked with authorities in Nigeria and Ghana, Lithuania, all over, in order to arrest 74 so far. But that only scratches the surface of what continues to occur. The people who are involved in these particular BEC scams were also romance scammers. They had work from home and lottery scams, many types of counterfeit check schemes also running parallel to this. This is a very interesting case, actually, and worth looking into if you are interested. Again, Operation WireWire.
How did that work country wise? Because that seems like a very disparate group of countries to work together to bring that down.
Oh yeah, it took years to bring everybody together from what I understand. And there were people arrested all over the US as well. So really what it was information sharing, and it was our Department of Justice authorities along with Nigeria. I think Interpol was involved as well. So what they were doing was they were working together to share information and then coordinating when they were going to break into this, when they were going to seize these funds. And it all came together probably brilliantly if you're bringing in that many people, and they all managed to pull this off. So it is worth looking into if you are intrigued about that sort of thing. I really enjoyed reading about it. And when it came out in 2018, my investigations team and I got together and just poured over a bunch of the documents because we were very excited that some of these people got arrested finally.
That really is, you don't expect that to happen. You just, it goes away into a black hole and you never hear about it again.
Yeah. But this one worked. And
Right.
I hope that they continue with more. But let's talk about detection strategies, the actual meat and potatoes of why we're having this conversation today. Banks, like the one where I work, we increasingly rely on alert-based systems to monitor transactions in near real time and assign a risk score. The highest scored transactions are reviewed by an analyst who will either allow or decline the transaction. Some of these alerts are looking for new payee account number in an otherwise normal vendor relationship. So if a company has been paying the same supplier's invoices for ages, but suddenly there's a new account number that the payment is going to, that'll actually send up an alert that's triggered by that new information. This way, the analyst can make sure the new account number is legitimate and can confirm the payment instructions. I actually had to do this just yesterday with a charitable organization that was sending a grant to another charitable organization that they've been doing this for years, and then the payment information changed and it sent up an alert. I had a few free minutes, so I went ahead and gave them a call and talked them through what we see on our side, and they were able to confirm with that other charity that yes, that is the correct payment information. So this happens every day. These risk scores are generated by the systems that use machine learning to compare typical and atypical transactions per customer. So that way, if something is out of pattern, it will score that transaction high. And we use our computer systems and these algorithms so that we don't have to have eyeballs on every transaction. We can have the system look for things out of pattern. Some systems use machine learning across many organizations, and they use that data to feed it right back into itself. They call it consortium data. So as analysts mark transactions good or bad, it scores similar transactions higher or lower for other banks as well. Another way that fraud investigators work with information security is to pull information from the emails. So we're asking questions like, was the to line altered? Is there a different address if you hover over the text? We like to have customers send us the emails they receive from the scammers so that we can look into this data more closely. So other types of emails we see, more than just the CEO being victim to a man in the browser, is spoofed emails or addresses that are just one letter different. So we look to see whether the domain name is misspelled or if there's a capital I where a lowercase l should be. These characters are only a few pixels different from each other. And what we end up doing is we just copy and paste the email address into a text so that we can manipulate that typeface and see if it's different. Very manual process, but it works. Consumer education is the best prevention. I have that in bold for a reason. Detecting it when it occurs is great, but let's try to prevent it in the first place. The more that people know and understand about phishing emails, social engineering, and the scams that exist, the better protected they are from falling for it. The second best prevention is training for financial institutions, because when we know more of what to look out for, more of these red flags, as Corey referred to it before, then we can help find these suspicious transactions. Notifications from industry groups about trends in the cyber fraud space are crucial, as is working closely with teams in information security, especially through coordinated efforts like this, where groups like you and I can talk together. Y'all want to talk about romance scams? Romance scams are
Romance.
one. I'm sorry?
Romance me.
All right. Let's do it. Romance scams are number one on any list when I'm talking to consumers about fraud prevention. The reason it is number one is because we see it over and over again every single day. And we see all types of people who are affected by this. And we see all types of transactions, people from all walks of life. Let's keep our friend Elizabeth in mind. I talked about her earlier. She's the single mom who's on dating sites, and she met the charming military member who is deployed overseas. Again, this is the FBI's definition of romance scam. This is what they write about it. The FBI has done a lot of research into these scams lately and the people who orchestrate them. We're going to talk about some of that research in a moment, but I want to make sure to address these three key points in this definition. There's a fake online identity, they gain the trust and affection of a mark, and then they manipulate to ask for money. They occur in that order because you have to have that trust first. So these scammers will often groom their victims for up to a year plus in order to gain that trust before even starting to ask about money. People, who is involved? Here is my disclaimer for everything I'm about to say in this section. These are gross generalizations. This is not an exhaustive list of the types of people who commit these crimes, nor is this a detailed list of attributes of every scammer or every victim who falls for it. These findings are from a 2017 FBI study and a 2018 white paper that included these psychological profiles. If anybody wants to reach out afterward for copies of that research, I am happy to provide it, and it is fascinating.
I would just like to pause for a moment and say that ColaSec would like to endorse your gross generalizations wholesale.
Typically, again, gross generalization. Typically, the scammers are one or more young men, often in Nigerian internet cafes, who work together to do these scams. They get more and more experienced keeping meticulous notes of conversations they have with their marks. And they often even run several personas at once. They learn through these conversations with you what pulls on your heartstrings, and they will use that against you later on to further manipulate you into eventually sending money to them or to an accomplice. They take images from other people's social media pages and craft personas of military members, like in our story. Overseas contractors is another big one. I have even seen secret agents. One of the interesting things that is mentioned in the FBI's study is they tend to use 2 first names. In Elizabeth's case, she fell for soldier James Rowland. In my investigations, I have found this to be the case about 80% of the time. Our victims, like Elizabeth, tend to be women aged 35 to 65 who are active on social media. They have some vulnerability that makes them receptive to relationships online, whether they've been recently divorced or widowed, or they spend way too much time on social media neglecting their real family relationships. They're often college educated, pretty smart, but they are trusting. They may not be all that tech savvy, and they can be naive when it comes to seeing others' intentions. What else tends to happen when someone falls for one of these is they get put on what's called a marks list. And that marks list gets sold and traded between scammers so that people will continue to get these emails and these friend requests and run the risk of being further victimized. So these marks lists, I'm going to go on a side tangent here. This is real stuff. Scattered Canary is an active ring right now. They are running a scheme that's affecting states' unemployment offices where funds are stolen from states and sent to victims, and those victims are being socially engineered to send that money elsewhere as part of a money mule scam. These victims were all obtained from prior marks lists. This is being investigated by the Secret Service as a full-scale compromise of these state unemployment offices. So far, they have counted hundreds of millions of dollars wrapped up in this. But I tell you that not to go off on my tangent there, but to let you know that these marks lists are real. Speaking of hundreds of millions, the true economic impact, we may never know the real economic impact of these romance scams. It is estimated that only 15% of these crimes ever get reported because the victims are embarrassed. They choose not to report. They also, as counterintuitive as it sounds, still feel some connection to the scammer, and they don't want to get them in trouble. This means the loss for these victims is not only the dollars that are sent, but the loss of a years-long relationship with someone they trusted. And that can be difficult to deal with and cause a huge blow to someone victimized by this. In 2018 alone, which is the most recent data that we have, 2018, over $350 million was lost due to romance scams. And this is over 18,000 complaints. So if that's only a portion of the actual loss, then the real figure is astronomical. With complaints increasing up to 70% year over year, the cost of investigating and prosecuting these goes up annually even more. So in Operation Wire, the big international ring that was busted, there were lots of romance scammers in that ring. Extraditing, trying, convicting, and housing these criminals costs our judicial system an untold amount of money. Remember also, these people have to continue to launder those funds to try to get those proceeds back into the legitimate economy. So that's even more people involved as money mules and even more just untold amounts of funds included in prosecuting these. So when I say 350 million just in 1 year only scratches the surface, I am not exaggerating. What technology are we using to detect this activity? How in the world can we spot when somebody is falling victim to a romance scam? The best tools we have in our arsenal include knowing what to look for as the first indicators that this is occurring. At the bank where I am, we have analysts who review suspicious wires and talk to customers about how they received these instructions. If we have a customer who has never sent a wire in their life and they come in and they want to wire $10,000 to Nigeria, they're getting on the phone with the fraud department so we can talk to them.
Thank God.
We also look at counterfeit checks that are mobile deposited. And if that is done with a new IP address, with a suspicious login in Nigeria, we actually get on the phone with those customers and ask if they made that deposit themselves. And if they didn't, did they give out their online banking information? Well, yeah, I gave it to my new online boyfriend. Your boyfriend is not who they say they are.
He sound cute.
We actually refer to these analysts as the heartbreakers because they're the ones who end up having to break the news that their boyfriend is a scammer. And that we end up having to close their account because everything is now compromised.
Have you seen any negative impact with those people breaking that kind of heartache news, that they've had negative reactions themselves?
You mean
They
like
do occasionally get emotional on the phone. Often they won't believe it. But if we close their account because it's been compromised, we let them open a new one to give them another chance, and they do it again, we have to close them out entirely, because at that point, they're not listening to us. They're a risk to the organization. And that's another risk with being a mark. If you've been repeatedly victimized by scams, banks won't want to bank you anymore because you're a risk. And we do get some pushback from that, but honestly, we're not wrong.
But I think Jeff was getting at the people that have to report that to them. Is there any ramifications or psychological issues from the people that have to constantly break bad news to people?
Not that I've been told, no. The analysts who do this most frequently, they're also the ones who are looking at suspicious online banking logins. They're looking at new online banking profiles for customers who haven't had one in the past. So we are looking for evidence of account takeover. We're looking for evidence that somebody is victimized by a scam. We know that by breaking this bad news to them, it may suck while we're doing it for the first couple of minutes, but it's so important and so worthwhile to provide that customer education that it is more important to give that information than it is to try to withhold it. It's because I don't want to make that phone call.
Right. You're helping people at the end of the day.
Yes.
And doing everything you can to help people. And though it may suck to listen to somebody break down crying on the other end of the line or whatever, it's news that has to be delivered.
Absolutely. Any other questions on that? I will go ahead and say that financial institutions actually do need to do this if they're going to prevent this from going any further and stop their customers from sending money to scammers. I have broken the news to people about their boyfriend. I have broken the news to people about my son's best friend who's in the military. We have to do it. People don't want to hear it. And sometimes we don't want to say it, to your point. But there's not much we can do about that except continue to educate them, because if we don't, and if we let this continue, then it just snowballs and they keep sending more and more money. Often life savings are drained by this. And I certainly would rather stop somebody from doing it $10,000 in than $100,000 in. So we can use that same machine learning technology to find these rings, like we discussed earlier with BEC. Finding the suspicious accounts where these funds are being sent, flagging those accounts through the consortia of other banks, banks talking to each other and filing reports will go far to train these systems to detect this type of activity. And like I've been saying, the best prevention is consumer education. Making these scams well known, continuing to talk about them, makes it less likely people will fall for them. We can't stop it entirely, but we can at least make it less likely. Social media sites are going to great lengths to remove suspicious profiles, but that'll only go so far. They will find ways around that. Helping to arrest people and prosecute these crimes will do more to prevent them from occurring in such high volumes in the future. I told you we were going to talk about what's next and why do I care?
Tracy, we had one quick question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
From the chat, have you ever enlisted help from overseas contractors or a deployed service member?
Interesting. Yes and no. I know that it is possible with other types of institutions, not just financial institutions, to reach out to other business partners all over the world to work together. There's a lot of accounting firms who will do that. My bank does not. We're a regional bank. We don't really have those kind of resources to work internationally. But we do work with other financial institutions and law enforcement to share that information and to help with details about this account over here or that account over there. Tell us why you shut that down so that we can look at this customer a little bit more closely. I personally have leaned on my own network of people. I am a military spouse, and so I know that military members who say, I'm stuck in Afghanistan, I missed the last helicopter home, I need $6,000 to get a plane ticket, I know that that's baloney. And I can tell those customers this is baloney because here's how it ought to go. This is why this person is scamming you. And I've also seen email correspondence and chat correspondence with a customer who was involved with a military member stationed at such and such base. And I thought, I know somebody there. And because this customer was not believing the things we were telling them, I reached out to my contact and I said, I didn't ask if this person was stationed there because we can't talk about that. But I asked, what's the name of this group who is stationed here? And it wasn't what the scammer said he was a part of. So just little things like that, we're able to pull from our resources and pull from our own knowledge as fraud investigators and as human beings who have a network of people all over to try to convince customers that they're caught up in one of these, and also to further our own investigations. We use any resource we can in order to create our cases. I hope that helps answer the question.
I think it did. That's fantastic.
I'm just surprised people don't trust the bank when the bank calls them and says, hey, we see a problem on your account. They don't trust that. That's surprising.
Well, these romance scammers are incredibly manipulative, and we are the person who is standing between them and their partner.
Yeah, okay.
So if you think about it that way,
thinking their best light.
Their emotions have been hijacked, and so all logical reason has been thrown out the window. It's a typical social engineering tactic, right?
Absolutely.
Like she said, they're taking notes on interaction. So if they're taking notes, they're able to like research their interests and kind of, gain their trust. And I would never do that to you, so.
Well, plus the bank is cold calling you out of nowhere. Who are you going to trust? The cold call out of nowhere or the person you've been talking to for months and months and months?
These are barriers that we run into for sure.
Interesting.
So let's talk about what's next. Why are we even talking about this today? Cybersecurity leaders can play a pivotal role in preventing and detecting wire fraud and these scams. We are talking about this because we want to use the internet for good, not evil. We can educate others as these preventative measures through groups like this one, talking to your friends and family about the risks of these kinds of scams and others, and writing and sharing articles about cyber fraud. Information security teams can and do work with fraud investigators to research rings of activity, monitor dark web posts, and provide that aggregate data. We can build systems to find these suspicious transactions as they occur, continuing on with machine learning, growing that, and even other innovations to protect people's data and their money. As we wrap up, let's talk about the future. Let's go Jetsons mode here and look into the future. Go ahead. Oh, I thought somebody was trying to speak. Side note, we should totally have that flying car by now.
David, I think, was trying to make the Jetsons car noise with his mouth, and it didn't work.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
He made Jeff leave, by the way, too. He got so fed up with that. I'm out.
Disconnected.
So is the trailer to that car actually attached to it, or are they just holding a lead and the dog is just following
The
them?
little boy is very clearly holding a lead.
Onroy? What was the boy's name?
Oh,
Onroy?
Elroy?
Elroy.
Elroy. Yes. I think he's just holding it through
I
the
think
glass.
so, too.
It's just a leash. It's just a
Through the
leash.
glass.
Through the
Also,
Yep.
his hand's going through the glass. Her hair's going through the glass. There's a number of things wrong with this glass, but
Don't think about it too much.
Don't judge my childhood cartoons. You shut up.
Prototype.
Jetson's jokes aside, how can we continue to learn about the organization of these schemes and how to detect them? Gathering data. Data on behavioral metrics can prove useful. Asking questions like, what are they doing to create their online personas? Are they using cut and paste to create their BEC emails and their online dating text messages? Are they using the same photos and social media posts? And can we get to that metadata? How are scammers selecting their victims so we can place vulnerable accounts at a higher alert? Consortium and shared data is going to be increasingly valuable as we can link identities across institutions to detect attack patterns and rings of activity. Phone number and email address analysis can include a reputation score, which involves how old is that email address? How old is that phone number? What location was it created in? Is it a burner? Is that email address only receiving notifications from social media posts? Was that email address used to register several suspicious domain names at the same time? Can we gather this data safely and securely while protecting privacy? All of these questions can be answered with the right technology and the right teams in place. I want to leave you with a call to action and another question. Now that you know how information security leaders can help detect and investigate wire fraud, how are you going to use this information? Thank you so much for having me this evening. I have really enjoyed speaking with you. If you have any other questions for me, I am happy to take them. And I welcome any ideas or suggestions about moving forward parallel together information security and fraud investigations.
Woo!
Very good. Thank you so much.
So I actually had a question. So I've had to deal with fraud at my company. And I mean, I like the idea of sharing some of that information, but where does that start? Because we reported it to a financial institute, and like I gave them pretty much a bad account that someone set up, never heard from them again. So if I work in one industry, it's not the banking industry. If I work in one industry, how do we start that sharing? Because yes, absolutely, like there was fraud trying to go on, but we had to catch it before we knew about it. Like, how am I supposed to know my industry is targeted for this type of fraud?
That's a good question. And I'd have to know more about what occurred and what type of industry it is in order to spitball some ideas. What I can talk about, though, is how banks are sharing that information with each other. And it's not just banks like you might be familiar with. It's also any financial institution like investment firms, things like that. Even insurance companies can share information. It's actually buried within the USA Patriot Act that we, under 314B, can communicate between financial institutions to discuss this kind of suspicious activity. There's a very specific way we have to do it, but we can share information with each other on suspicious transactions and suspicious accounts. And we
sorry, go ahead.
We use that frequently in order to ascertain the risk level of certain accounts. Go ahead.
Well, so is that bank to bank, or is that bank and out? See, because that's where I was like, I'm not in the banking industry, and I can probably just go ahead and say I'm in the healthcare industry, right? So we've had fraud cases come through. How am I supposed to get what the banks are? Because, like I said, got reported, got a nice email, but never heard from the bank again, right? No one reached out. No one asked any questions. Gave them a ton of information, and I expected that it just got handled. Maybe people got money back or whatever, but being proactive too. It's like knowing the actors out there and some of the techniques they're using, because there was a lesson in the way that they did it, which I'm not going to talk about here, but the way that they did it was certainly a lesson that we applied internally for security awareness and sharing of information internally, but how do banks share with healthcare? How do healthcare share with banks? Like I said, right now it's a one-way street within my industry. I provided the information, never heard anything else back.
So when you provided that information to the bank, they are obligated, if it reaches certain thresholds, to report that to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, which is part of the Department of Treasury. So there's a mechanism called a suspicious activity report, which is anytime you have suspicious transactions, $5,000 or more, or $25,000 in certain cases, or you have a large ring of activity that is involving like a data breach or something like that, these institutions are obligated to report that to FinCEN. After that, it is up to the bank what they do with that information. What I always encourage is for our banks to write articles and for our banks to send investigators to consumer groups to talk about scams and consumer fraud prevention. And I know that other banks do the same. So they are taking their own cases, their own investigations. They're learning more from that. They are sharing that with each other and with other industries, and through these trade organizations and conferences, they can use their cases to share with other institutions what occurred and what they did about it. The specific details, much like my stories earlier, the details are changed to protect the innocent. There is no Elizabeth and there is no Palmetto family movers, but they will take that information and act on it however they determine they need to act on it. So the suspicious activity reporting is helpful for law enforcement in order to go catch those bad guys. And the FBI can access that. Even local law enforcement police officers can access that, and internationally. So we do have the ability to share that information through those mechanisms, through FinCEN, as long as a suspicious activity report was filed. And if it met certain thresholds, it ought to have been.
Okay, thank you.
Do you does the banking industry have information sharing and analysis centers like ISACs? I know in higher education we have those, and I was just curious if you're sharing information within your industry itself.
Absolutely. The main organization is the American Bankers Association, and they have divisions within ABA that focus strictly on risk and fraud and things like that. And they do annual surveys for what banks are seeing. Where I am, we're also part of a mid-sized bank coalition that gets together regularly and talks about what types of fraud we're seeing, what we're doing about it, how we prevent these. Banks share that information with each other. Absolutely. We learn from other banks all the time.
Do you have conferences
Yes.
regionally and nationally that you participate in?
Absolutely.
Cool.
There's two trade associations that I'm a member of, and the conference was canceled. Actually, it's virtual, so it's not technically canceled. This year, I've been in years past where it's an international group of people, and I will sit at the same table as a guy from Nigeria talking about fraud. It's fascinating, and I love going to these conferences. I nerd out so hard, and my poor husband has to hear all my stories about what I learned at the conferences.
Excellent.
So,
What are the after parties like?
Asking the important questions.
Just saying, I've been to after parties that included Vanilla Ice and some other people. So
I mean,
Oh, wow.
as they do.
We had last year. We had as a video conference the guy who broke the Panama Papers.
Holy shit.
oh, that's
Nice.
cool.
It
Yeah.
was very cool, and we also had the whistleblower for oh crap, what's her name? The blood test lady. I'm drawing the name.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm blanking as well.
Yeah, so we had the whistleblower.
Chelsea Manning.
No,
Somebody
different
else.
person.
Elizabeth Holmes.
Elizabeth Holmes. Yes.
Yes.
So the guy who who blew the whistle on her company and started the takedown. He was at the conference last year.
Very
Very
nice.
cool.
On a slightly related, I guess, but maybe different note, there's a open source intelligence group of people that are out there who are focusing on the human trafficking aspect of social media and that. Of course, there's a financial link within that. Have you been involved or know of people who have been involved in kind of that end of kind of open research into things?
Yeah, mostly those are from the BSA departments, not the fraud department. So they are looking for the money laundering patterns more than the scam patterns that we are. But I do know of people who are involved in that. And I actually have an investigator on my team who spotted an account that may be caught up in human trafficking. And we were able to make those reports. Don't know what came of it because we don't often know the end result of the reports that we make. But
Right.
hopefully, if it was what it looked like, then hopefully that got taken care of.
Awesome. That's great.
Yes.
Have you ever had any celebrities show up in a fraud investigation?
I
Bad or
cannot
good?
confirm it's
Yes.
Come on.
A loaded question.
Come on,
Oh,
man.
it is. Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah.
What? Like, yeah, sure. Rodman
I
came across my desk yesterday. Like,
I'm just saying, you never like these people like what's her name? Oh, from Shark Tank that just had a bunch of fraud occur. I don't think
Oh,
it's
yeah.
at this point, but
Yep.
you know, there's got to be like every once in a while, you just that's an interesting name for me to be investigating right now. What, like, again, good or bad? They could have been.
Rodman is engaged in some fraud. That seems weird.
Did you say Dennis Rodman?
Yeah, I'm being facetious. I'm not actively slandering anyone. Let's just move
All right,
on.
yeah, you're back
Before-
on track. So I had
Before
one.
someone sues our 501c3 into oblivion.
God.
Tracy, if you were to improve the wire transfer system to maybe try to respond to some of the abuses of, especially story number one, where it's purely like, hey, we changed our account. Here, use this. How would you like improve that system?
I would rely on that consortium link up where in almost real time, you can find out more information about the account on the other end, the age of the account, the balance of the account. We can do that sometimes today with checks. We need to be able to expand that into other types of transfers because at some banks, when you run a check, it will tell you immediately whether the funds are truly available or not. We need to be able to do that with wires and tell other banks about the health of that account on the other side. That's my dream scenario.
Yeah, like a debit card, it'll decline it if there's no money in the account. I would imagine either, with the wire, it could say, hey, this is, maybe
This is a risky account or this is an okay account.
right. And I was almost wondering on the opposite side, on the business, account owner side, could there be almost like a multi-factor, turn two keys to set the nukes type of situation where, like you said, the example, the secretary or the account executive couldn't be a single point of failure to be compromised.
Yep.
You'd have to have two individuals to.
Yeah, a lot of larger companies do that where they have you have to have a voice authorization. You have to have two people to approve a wire over a certain dollar amount. Those are internal policies for each company, though.
Right.
The bank can't really set that. To some degree, with the larger, huge corporations that bank with large, huge banks, they will have limits in place that say, if you are going to bank with us at this degree, you have to have these things in place in your treasury department in order for us to securely do business with you.
Yeah.
That's difficult to pull off with small businesses.
Sure. Like you said, and a lot of flags only are hitting at $2,500, $5,000 threshold. So if these scammers know that, they might be hitting at small dollars and trying to get, little
Absolutely.
potatoes.
And they do that. They test the waters too to see what your review threshold is.
Right. Like on my personal account, I have $100 threshold, so I get an alert if anything in my account over $100 is drafted. But
Yep.
if those alerts aren't, there, or if the threshold
Draft 93.98 from David Girl, and he's not going to notice.
right. Interesting.
So yes, banks have a hand in being able to prevent this, but honestly, some of it does fall on the consumer to some degree. And that's why I push education so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not 100% the bank's, onus to resolve this. It is the bank's interest to provide, more and more features. Just like on the consumer level, banks provide multi-factor and things like that to try to reduce, account, takeover and things like that. But it's still, like you said, on, the romance stuff, it's some people are just gonna be susceptible to that and maybe even be repeat offenders. So you can't block 100% of it.
Right.
So on the subject of consumer outreach and education, what does that look like?
Well, last year, one of the coolest things that I was able to do was I actually went to 2 senior centers in my town and I gave presentations on elder financial exploitation and current scams that are affecting our elder customers. And that was a huge success. The only reason I haven't picked it back up is because all the senior centers are shut down right now. But I loved doing it. And so I would look for other opportunities to do that. We also write articles that we put out on our bank's page. We work with our information security team in order to put those together. That's what outreach looks like to me. Other banks, other industries may have different views of that. But honestly, getting in front of people and talking about consumer fraud prevention is really what makes my heart sing. So I want to do that as much as possible.
This is how they're going to come at you. So look out for it.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm saying, like, you're literally getting in front of your customers and saying, this is how they're going to come at you. This is the things they're going to try and dupe you with, and you need to be
the goal
prepared.
is, I want them to hear it from me first, not from the IRS agent on the telephone.
Right.
So in that vein, what are the 1 or 2 most important things that consumers can do to protect themselves?
1 or 2 most important things. Honestly.
Or 12, whichever comes first.
So the very first thing that came to mind is to lose that sense of urgency. Is to take a beat and think about the transactions before you do them. The more you think about it, and I think this was even brought up earlier, the more you think about it, the more funky this sounds. Like, that doesn't sound right. Why would I do that? They want to give, they being the scammers, they want you to have that sense of urgency so that you don't think about it. That's why they write the emails with terrible broken English and horrible formatting, is they don't want you to think about it. They want you to act.
The gun has to be to your head, so you transfer the money right now and don't think about it.
Yep. So one of the reasons that I don't immediately send a wire when it's under review is because I want them to reconsider. One of the reasons that I tell our tellers to talk to them about how did you receive this check, it looks really weird, is because I want them to think about it. I want them to say, that work from home opportunity did sound a little weird. This might be a scam. So removing that sense of urgency is probably going to be my number 1 suggestion. That's a great question. Thank you for that.
No, that's fantastic. I know at the higher ed institute I'm at, we've had a lot of direct deposit fraud, people trying to do that, and they had implemented a number of controls, including, like, we don't make that change except until a certain time period later. And you get a lot of notices that say that it's going to your original account and we're not going to forward it to the new account, and we're going to continue to send you notices that this is about to change. So
yeah.
So is there any initiative or looking into building a good relationship with high risk I guess patrons or customers. So like, you know, the seniors, right? So someone is constantly reaching out to them, or whenever they have an issue, the same person's picking up, so that when they call and say, hey, there's a fraud alert on your account, they're more likely to trust them than some scammer who's been spending, like you said, months or even years at this point trying to get money out of them.
We take an approach where we at my institution are still very community oriented. Like, our bank is growing, but we still have our branches that are in neighborhoods, and people, especially older folks, go to the branches to conduct business. So the bankers are the ones building that relationship with people. And in some circumstances, it won't even be the fraud investigator who's talking to them. We'll have the branch talk to them because they've built that relationship. On the other hand, if we've got these repeat offenders, we do have an investigator who's dedicated to our elder financial exploitation cases. And this person has had to be on the phone with the same customers over and over again. They're very familiar with each other by now. So we do have that relationship building.
Maybe that's too good of a relationship, and that they're calling, they're trying to get the scan so they get to talk to that person again and again.
Anything else?
Going once, going twice.
I think all we have coming in from the chat is this has been an excellent presentation, outstanding and wonderful. So
That makes
thank
me
you
so
from
happy.
everybody who's been listening in on the feed.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to talk to y'all. This has been a lot of fun.